Hello, my name is Nicole Hartley Bradford, and I was asked to bring possibilities for a young mother who is choosing to have her children not return to school for all the reasons that are unique to her. And she is not the first mother who I have been in touch with since March. It's now January of 2021. She's not the first mother who I've been in touch with who is um, asking for possibilities around what I think of as wild schooling, unschooling, creating rich learning environments for children of all ages, for humans of all ages. And this is a topic that has been dear to my heart for a long time, since I was a child and experienced rich and less rich learning environments. Since have been a mother for coming up 30 years, I have 4 children who right now range in age from 13 to almost 30. My children and I have experienced a diversity of learning environments in and outside what we would call a home space, with various other people and groups in different kind of contexts. We have largely lived in the first world context, but in a subcontext of second world and sometimes even third world within a first world context. We've traveled to the second world. We've traveled to other first world places. And again, kind of spent time in microclimate kind of cultures that may be considered second and third world, including stretches of homelessness and stretches in kind of refugee type situations. And in all of these times and places, I have developed resources and ideas and visions and practical questions to guide the spaces becoming rich learning spaces that are outside of the mainstream, clearly. So this is especially interesting to me as a next culture builder and a person who is loving what I'm seeing, to be quite honest, about the social paradigms, political, economic worlds, game worlds, starting to shiver and shake and crumble, and in some cases collapse. And this isn't a talk about whether you believe that's happening or not. This is a talk about what else is possible. What else is possible for humans as learning beings, and especially for children and people who have children in their lives or want to have children in their lives. So first of all, my main shift, the main shift that I see that I have made, that makes where I come from different from where many teachers and educators, business people, coaches, people who like have authority about things that can be learned about, and have maybe experience about things that can be learned about, and also have this kind of old map of thinking that children don't know, or that says children can't be trusted to learn what they need to learn. People can't be trusted to learn what they need to learn. And my experiment has been, can children be trusted? How about what happens if we trust children what if we trust children to know what they want to learn and to be oriented by their curiosity and their drive to explore towards rich and learning that has consequence? And as a young mother with very few resources financially and socially and in terms of family, I often was in a position where I had no choice in a way but to trust my children, but to watch them and see what happened. I made sure that this space had no imminent danger in it. And then I often just sat back, sometimes exhausted, and watched what unfolded. And what I noticed is that my children were born to learn. They learned without me doing anything. In fact, they learned more when I stayed out of the way. Sometimes it was important for me to join them and be with them and speak to them, reflect with them, point things out, name things, especially when it came to language, and and be there with them in a way that wasn't about getting in their way or making things happen. It was about empowering things to happen. And it was about supporting learning and enhancing their learning, bringing something new into the learning space that would add to and it wasn't forced that they pick it up and learn with it. It was more given as a possibility, as a variable that they could add if they wanted to, or they could leave if they wanted to. And often I learned a great deal myself about possibilities as I watched them implement the variables that I introduced in so many different ways that I didn't expect or didn't see coming. So trusting children that they will learn, that they do learn, that they are sources of their own learning. They are what is here to learn. And when we give them space and nourish them and bring warmth and bring possibilities, they thrive. And this idea that a child can't have a prosperous future or a healthy future or a successful future unless they learn this list of things, this curriculum that is usually government imposed, um, and and that somehow many parents and many other humans, grown humans, have it in their mind that without these pieces of information, kind of copied and pasted into the minds of children, that all of these outcomes become impossible. And my my exploration and experiments and my interactions with unschooled children has made it clear to me that these ideas are just without merit. I have met so many, interacted with so many children who didn't get fed the curriculum in a school setting, didn't get textbooks, tests, quizzes, be made to do projects that they didn't want to do. And I have been fascinated to learn about how these children learned so many of the things on the list in ways and at times that just didn't go according to kind of the prescribed idea of what an education is. For example, children who learned more about ancient Greece than I will ever know by, first of all, reading series about, based on, like fun fiction based on historical ancient Greece, and then went on to write their own stories and do their own research so that they could write accurate stories. Because children, it turns out, though they love imagination and they love making things up, they also go through phases where they really love accuracy. They want to have the exact population of XYZ. They want to know exactly how things work. And when we encourage and make room for the imaginary and magical and fictional, and also trust that they will also go into this factual, clear, accurate kind of ways of thinking and doing things, you do come out without the worry that I hear often in a parent that, they won't know history, they won't know the truth, they won't know the facts, and they won't know how to come up with facts or even distinguish between facts and fiction. And that is another thing that I've learned that I can trust children to do, is to know the difference between imaginary and factual. And I don't even know how they do it. And certainly I think that when we feed children ideas under the threat of some kind of failure, that that there's this importance about lying and telling the truth, or mystery and magic and boring cold hard facts, because different educators and parents can come at this from different angles and can start to skew and spin children's emerging like memetics around these matters in ways that we didn't intend to. And often it is, I trace this back to this fear that children can't be trusted. I An example comes to mind also around very early physical development in babies. And the experience that I had was before my son, my younger son Talus wasn't even walking yet. He learned to walk at 9 months, but he wasn't yet walking. So he might have been 7 or 8 months old, and he was crawling, outside, and he crawled up onto the root of a big cedar tree. And as he crawled, some of the other people in the vicinity were like, oh no. But I, as his mother, had been with him every day of his life so far, and I knew almost instinctively what he could and couldn't do yet. And I knew that him crawling up that tree was not dangerous. I noted that there was like very soft ground on either side of the tree, and that the distance wasn't far enough for him to hurt himself. I was near enough to, if I saw him lose his balance, to probably scoop him up. And he crawled and then started kind of crawling on his hands and feet without his knees, in a kind of like new pose to him. And he started to come up the side of the tree trunk, and he ended up in a standing position. And I watched him for it seemed like quite a while, kind of tip himself back and feel himself balance on this uneven root against this vertical tree, and play with his own ability to balance. And I still, to this day, I remember that so clearly. And I remember it as an example of how, if we can just stand by and trust, and when a parent knows her child, her baby, from being with them, it's much more inevitable that she, or if it's a father, he kind of knows how close or far to position themselves in order to create like a container of safety within which that child can test their edges, test their limits. This is a very physical version of that, but there have also been examples in my life of like more socially interactive versions of that, where I kind of stood back and watched two children test their boundaries with each other, and anger started to happen, and clarity started to happen, and declarations started to be made. And I certainly was on the verge of intervening on many occasions when one or the other of the children kind of like let go or released from what seemed like a building conflict, and it just dissipated, and they each went on to the next thing, sometimes together, sometimes not together. So this idea of parents and other adults in children's lives as kind of catchers in the rye, if you've read that book, there's this presence close to the edge where it gets really dangerous, but giving enough space for outside the kind of middle marshmallow comfort zone, so that there's this more dangerous, edgy kind of learning. It's the learning edge, it's the cutting edge, it's the experimental edge, it's the edge where you don't quite know how it's going to go. You maybe don't know at all how it's going to go, and you try things, you experiment. So this wild unschooling is all about a life of being an experimenter, always doing research, testing, beta testing things, prototypes, drafts, rewrites, first efforts, sketches, developing into art. Because isn't this what we want for our children, is for them to encounter and become rich as artists of living, artists of learning, artists of evaluating, of noticing the feedback that the universe inevitably gives and that we give each other, and that comes in all these forms that say, that says in one way or another to us, this worked, this didn't work so well, maybe you could try this. And if that is the kind of constant conversation, what worked about that? What didn't work about that? What else could you try? Do you want to hear some ideas I have, some possibilities I have about what else you might try? And as long as children's curiosity and inspiration is kind of rolling, that will grow, that learning will happen. And when that thread or that branch kind of slows down, it's, one of my fun things to do is to notice how many beats it takes before they're on to the next thing. Understanding too that the next thing might be a rest period or an integration period or a kind of, I don't know, almost like a liquid state between this adventure and getting all this information. And then as that kind of like, as they kind of go like this from that experience before they kind of solidify, and then they're like, okay, now what? And to give children time and space and to not interfere again with that, so that they can be in this constant learning spiral of coming up against challenges, working, reworking, trying something new, celebrating their wins, and then on to the next thing. Now, I am by far not like, there are so many other people who have been thinking about this, experimenting with it, reading about it, trying things, living this process, exact process I'm talking about, in regard to setting up spaces for children and trying new tools and doing it in new kind of contexts and with new forms and ways. And there are a gazillion, I promise you, okay, maybe don't quote me on the exact number, gazillion, resources out there for a person who might find themselves going, I thought I was going to do regular schooling for 12 years, and then they would go to post-secondary, and now COVID's happened, and that is like, I want more possibilities. More possibilities. It's almost like we go, that's the possibility, and I'm looking for something out here on the edge. And how I'd really like to encourage people to look at it is that modern culture has the education path. It's very limited. It goes from preschool, kindergarten, well, daycare, preschool, kindergarten, grade school, middle school, high school, post-secondary, it's a very, and then there might be there's some branches that are like, oh, I went on the instead of the academic route, I went the kind of technology route. So I went to an institute of technology instead of a university, or I went to a more practical college rather than a more academic post-secondary option. And, there's these forms of, when it comes to trades and when it comes to less academic kind of branches, and yet still it's like this one like tree that has a few branches. And what I'm saying is that if you take it, especially when you take it all the way back, and at any point you can exit that stream, those streams, and there are so many possibilities. So many. You don't need to move out onto an acreage. You don't need to move to a different country. You don't need, and you might want to, you might choose to. There are just so many possibilities. So a few things that I would encourage people to do is get Googling for free learning, unschooling, homeschooling groups in your area, collectives, projects, lists. Find one person, ask about their resources, find two more people, ask about theirs, and inevitably you will find out that there is a community around you of people already doing this. And if it's a smaller community, you can more quickly become a leader in that community by being the first one to invite people to do things, even if it's just to a Zoom call. You say, like, once you've got one person, say, can I have a Zoom call with you? And then from that Zoom call, say, who else do you know that might be interested in joining us, say, this time next week or in 3 days, to talk about this more, to talk about this more, to talk about this more. Who knows, maybe you become just a weekly group that gets together to say how it's going, trade ideas, trade stories, get like almost like a pit stop where you get fueled and fresh tires and your windshield wiped, and you're in the race again, in the fun, in the learning, in the playing, in the experimenting again with your kids. And there are so many places to get inexpensive resources: thrift shops, secondhand stores, Free Cycle, Kijiji, all the different online. There's so many ways to get things that you don't need to buy. And then there are so many resources available to people who have a budget for it. This doesn't need to be expensive. In fact, you could even do an experiment on homeschooling for 1 week, spending no money. And then, especially when your kids are older, you can do free schooling, wild schooling for 1 week and see how much money we make. My 4-year-old daughter one day wanted to buy her brother a birthday present. And I said to her, I have no money. And this was, again, the necessity that came into being for me as a young mother in times when I was living as a second worlder or a third worlder in the first world. I actually had literally run out of money. Now, this became a wonderful thing because I had no other answer for her. I don't have any money for you to get Tallis a birthday present. And so she said, well, where's your bank card? And then this 4-year-old little girl had a little tutorial on how banks work. Before you take money out of the bank, someone has to put the money in, usually you. And so I have none to take out. So there was a lesson in that. And she didn't know that yet. Wow. Well, how do you get money? I said, well, people work for money. They do things for people that the people who want those things done are willing to pay for. And so what could we do was the next question. And it had snowed a little that morning. It was the spring, but it had snowed a good couple inches. And I said, well, one possibility is that since it snowed, there might be people who would be happy to pay someone, especially a 4-year-old, to shovel their steps and their walk and their sidewalk and maybe brush off their car. And she just lit up. She's like, I can do that. She'd helped us do that so many times. And so we got into our snow clothes and we made some hot chocolate, and we got the brushes out of our car and the shovels, and we had a small one that she liked to use. And off we went. And we started out at a neighbor's house where we knew the neighbor. And we went up to the door and said hi. And then she's like, so what's going on? I said, well, Karis here wants to make some money so she can buy her brother a birthday gift. And so we are, I'm coming around with her, and she's going to do some of the work and I'm going to do some of the work. And so we're wondering if you would like your walk shoveled and your cars brushed off. And she doesn't need a lot of money. So just for pocket change, like just whatever pocket change you have, are you up for that, for us to do that? And she's, yes, she was. So off we went. And that became our first kind of probably 30 or 35 stops we made that day, where we talked about work ethic and being gentle around people's cars so as not to set off any alarm they might have, to not dent or dirty the respect for people's property, and doing a great job. So this was this big lesson in integrity. And then when we were done, we knocked back on the door, and we just a handful of change. And I took it, I showed it to Kara. She lit up and started running to the next house. I stuffed it in my pocket. And 2.5, 3 hours later, she still wanted to go to another house. And I was like, I want to go home. and when we got home, we had another lesson, counting money, quarters, dimes, nickels, bills. There was a great math lesson came of it, and we had made $60 in pocket change. Some of the houses, the people said, nope, we don't want you to do it. I was like, okay. Some of them said, nope, we're not paying anyone to do that. I said, well, can we do it anyway? Some of them said yes. Some of them said, no way, I have a kid whose job is to do that and he needs to do his job. So no, you can't do it. And in between the houses, this 4-year-old daughter, Karis, and I, we talked about the different kinds of people there are in the world. We talked about why someone gave us $2 and someone gave us 8. And we remember that day, both of us now. She's 13, and we both remember that day with big smiles on our faces. So it just shows, it shows what's possible. There's a 4-year-old learning how to make a living, or at least a possibility for making a living. She doesn't have to shovel every day of her life. But what about when she wants to? What about when she knows that in order to make $100 in a day, she could just blast out there with a shovel, knock on the door. She started saying the words. She actually let me have half of the money we made because she said I had said most of the words and I had let her do most of the work. So that's a story that I just think really, I mean, it inspires me, and I'm one of the characters in the story. I hope it inspires you, and I hope that one possibility, one inspired possibility might lead to another, and that you'll talk to your kids a lot about it. Something that I've seen in some families too, that I've tried myself, is to have a chalkboard wall or whiteboards or even just pieces of paper taped up onto the wall where there's a list of what people want to learn and what they want to try, and on a day where you're kind of like, kind of wander by your list and be like, oh yeah, I remember writing that up there and something's happened since then. And now I'm up for this action. And it can also be a wonderful thing to do, to have a celebration of learning where it's like, you know what? I want to just celebrate my learning today. And will you listen? Will you listen to me celebrating my learning? And maybe take a turn too, so I can celebrate yours. And then just start, and this is great for practice public speaking, practice for articulating things. You can ham it up so it can be like acting class, improv. Just brings about so much creativity, and it brings about connection for people in families, brings out about variety. We can be laughing and learning and loving together, even though we've got these restrictions that we're following in order to keep ourselves safe, or in order to keep ourselves learning in a new way. What if it's not about being restricted? What if it's about finding ways to bloom where we're planted and seeing what happens when we go for it? So I wish you and your families, your children, your inner children inside of yourselves, a beautiful time of learning and exploration and adventure and connection with each other. Thank you. If you want more from me around this or other topics, you can get in touch with me at Awakening the Village. That's at my website, NicoleHartleyBradford.com. And you're probably seeing this on YouTube, so you can find out more in the write-up of the video. Thank you. Bye-bye.